Welcome back to Red Cedar Radar. Today I have a preview episode for you to get all the information that you'll need prior to Michigan State's matchup against Penn State at the Breslin at this recording time tomorrow at 7 p.m. I am joined by Zane Brancefield from Happy Valley Insider, the Penn State version of Spartans Illustrated here at Rivals. How are you today, Zane?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it. Before we get into too much about Penn State basketball, tell me a little bit about you and your relationship to Penn State and kind of what you do at Happy Valley Insider.
So currently I'm a student at Penn State, but I'm doing an internship with Happy Valley Insider, and I'm a contributor for them, and we just wrapped up Penn State football a couple weeks ago.
Nice, super nice. So, are you a journalism major at Penn State looking to kind of go into something like this in the future?
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome, super cool. Okay, so I think we can jump right in. Talk to me a little bit about, now I followed Penn State a little bit just because they had some recent games against some other Big Ten teams. I kind of wanted to see how those shook out. But tell me a little bit about their non-conference schedule, how they did, good wins, bad losses, just a background on how they've done going forward. Or in the past, not going forward, in the past. Sorry.
Yeah, so Penn State has kind of had a weak schedule so far. Their biggest games were those losses they had against like Texas A&M, Butler, and VCU. Obviously, they lost to Bucknell as well and Maryland. That was a big 5-game losing streak for them. And then they did end up winning against Ohio State, who that was like their biggest game up to that point was playing like Maryland and Michigan. And so this Penn State team obviously has struggled because you don't want to lose 5 games in a row. And they've won most of their games at home, but really just in general, this Penn State team has struggled. They are a young team. It's Mike Rhodes' first year. He's the head coach at Penn State. And the team has 10 new players, 9 which were transfers. So they got a little bit of wiggle room there. They're trying to figure some things out. And also just a lot of injuries as well, trying to figure out what rotations they're going to use and what works and what doesn't, trying to figure out how this young team's going to go and look and go going forward.
Talk to me a little bit about, do you like Mike Rhodes as the head coach? I know you haven't seen too much of him yet. Obviously, this is his first season, but what do you think about him during these first couple non-conference games and, dipping his toes into playing Maryland and Ohio State? What have you seen from him that you've liked so far?
I think Mike Rhodes does an excellent job. You got to give him credit. He hasn't had a lot of time. He came in and right away had to try to get players out of the transfer portal, and you're only going to get so much talent when you're going to a new school, and it's not really developed. Penn State's not really known as a basketball school, and so he's got a lot of disadvantages for him, but I think he does a good job just trying to figure out what works, and there's only so much you could do. They can blame whoever they want, but reality is the team just doesn't have a lot of top talent, and they're just having a rough year, and that's expected. You got to look at 2 years ago when Micah Shrewsbury, he was the first-year head coach at Penn State, and he struggled as well, and that team didn't really do anything until the next year when they went to the tournament last season. So I think it's expected of a new head coach and a young program, and Penn State's just trying to get their feet in the water and trying to figure out this whole basketball thing to get all together. So I think he does a nice job. I think he's good for the program, and he's good for the players. I've only ever heard the players say good things about him. And so I think that's big for a head coach because you want players to respect you. So I think he's the right guy for the job. I think it's just a matter of giving the guy some time, let him figure out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, and piecing together a roster with all those different transfers, you're going to be bringing a lot of different guys together. And like you said, it just takes time. Some people are unrealistic about how long it takes to kind of build up a program. So I understand. Speaking of Micah Shrewsbury, we didn't talk about this before, but I'm curious. What did you think about him leaving? Were you disappointed to see him go? I know there was some speculation that he might stick around at the end of that last season or he might go. What were your thoughts on that?
Aside from speculation, I think there's a lot of reasons. Obviously, a coach leaves or it doesn't leave, but I think Micah Shrewsbury did a lot of good things for Penn State. The fact that he took a team that hadn't really done anything, he'd been here for 2 seasons and then went to the NCAA tournament. Like, that's pretty impressive altogether. With a lot of guys who, frankly, they just stayed. They didn't leave when Patrick Chambers left, and I don't know. I think Micah Shrewsbury did a good job. I think he did what he could. with the amount of time he was given. And so a lot of respect to him there. But I just think sometimes Penn State needs new things. You get a new coach like Mike Rhodes, and I just think they got to figure out from then on. You can't look at the past. You got to keep looking forward.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, talk to me a little bit about. I know Ohio State has struggled a little bit this season, but what did Penn State do right in the Ohio State game that they should transfer over into their game against Michigan State?
I think the biggest thing was Penn State. This Penn State team, they're playing with a chip on their shoulder. It's a young team. It's a new team. They they're very gritty. They don't give up. They kept fighting. I remember being at the game and people were like, "Oh, this game's over" at halftime when Penn State was down by like 19 points, and it's like it could be over. It couldn't. That's the thing about basketball. Anything can happen, and Penn State just didn't give up, and they kept fighting. And I think that's their biggest strength in this team is that they keep fighting no matter what happens. And I think it's going to be something to look forward to when they play Michigan State here on Thursday because Michigan State is a much better team on paper and just in general. They beat Butler by a lot, and Penn State got killed by Butler. So it'll be a matter of who wants it more. And I think this Penn State team likes to keep fighting until the very end.
That is something that Michigan State's team has struggled with a little bit. Up until recently, they've kind of found their chip on their shoulder, maybe, because, in their couple bad losses early in the season, there wasn't a lot of, I didn't see a lot of grit there. Like, they didn't really want it. Nobody really was stepping up to the plate. So that might be something to watch, between those two teams, who has the most of that and who can kind of pull out the win because of that. So, that's an interesting point because that's something I've noticed that Michigan State, up until recently, didn't really have. Do you have a straight up game prediction for this matchup against Michigan State?
I don't know about a specific score. I think Michigan State still wins by about 10. I think that's a fair assumption. But anything can happen. Last second jumpers, buzzer beaters, anything, overtime. Penn State went to overtime with Georgia Tech and lost then. So anything can happen, obviously. But I think Michigan State does blow this out. And this Penn State team doesn't play good on the road at all or at neutral sites. So
Yeah, I think that's a big thing about Big Ten season. Where you land on the road is very important because those are just tough games. It's really hard to win on the road in the Big Ten. Um, Talk to me maybe a little bit more about your outlook for the rest of the season for Penn State. So, past the Michigan State game, what do you think about, the rest of the Big Ten and, the probability of them playing some games in March? What are your thoughts there?
I think this Penn State team, I think, can do what last year's team did and maybe make a deep run for like the Big Ten tournament, but it's going to take a lot to get there. They got a lot to do. Like I mentioned before, they have some injuries. Penn State's one center transfer out of Miami, Favor Ire. His first game back was last week against Ryder, and he only played 4 minutes, so it's not like you get to see a whole lot of him to see what he's going to do. Jameel Brown just came back from injury, and now Nick Kern Jr. is injured. Two key players for Penn State. So it's just a matter of can this team stay healthy? Puff Johnson missed the first few games of the season as well, and he's just now starting to find his groove and figure out his place offensively with this team. And obviously, the Big Ten schedule is tough for any team, whether that's Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State, any of them, especially when you have to go against like the other top teams like Purdue. Nobody can overlook Purdue. Purdue's one of the best teams in college basketball, not just the Big Ten, but in the whole nation. And so that's always going to be tough. And Penn State plays them away, and that's going to be quite difficult. Last year, they played them in neutral site at the Palestra, and going out to Indiana and trying to beat Purdue is going to be tough. And that's their fourth game right after Michigan State. They play Michigan State, Michigan, and Northwestern, then play Purdue. And that doesn't give them a lot of wiggle room to really figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work. So I think this Penn State team, if they get better, I think they can be okay. But there's not much you can do when you just have a lack of talent compared to some other teams. Obviously, the biggest point here is like Kanye Clary. He's a sophomore. He averaged like 2 points a game last season for Penn State. Now he's averaging 18.2. That's a big step. But you can't expect all your guys to take that kind of jump and translate that over from this point in the season to later. A guy's either going to be really good at scoring, he's going to be really good at defense, or he's not. And numbers will fluctuate a little bit, but I think I think this Penn State team can get better, but how much better? I don't think their ceiling's that high compared to a Michigan State team.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question about who to kind of watch on this team. So that was a great point there. And that was something that at the beginning of Michigan State's season, I was a little bit worried that we were relying so much on Tyson Walker to be the only guy that could make the shots when they needed them. And that's just too much to put on one guy, especially heading into Big Ten play. So Penn State and Michigan State, they may mirror each other in a couple areas this season, even though maybe that wasn't expected because of the preseason rankings. Um, any other points that you want to mention about Penn State basketball before we kind of wrap up our little segment here?
I think the big thing is this Penn State team isn't very consistent with their be offensively or defensively. I think their defense is their biggest asset, that and just their want to win. But they had games that they probably could have done better if you say like one guy would have scored more. Where like I said, Kanye Clare is averaging 18-2 and he had 4 points one game and they lost by 20. And I don't think that if you're supposed to be the top scorer on the team, I don't think that's really acceptable. You have to be able to score. And Penn State has two guys that are scoring double digits. That's Kanye Clare, Ace Baldwin Jr. Ace Baldwin transferred in from VCU with Mike Rhodes, and he's not been super consistent. If he's not scoring, he's passing though, which he makes up with. Versus Kanye Clare, he's either scoring or he's not really in the game. And so Penn State's just trying to figure out who their top scorers are going to be, and it changes night to night. Sometimes you'll have a couple guys on the bench drop double digits, and other nights you're hoping one guy on the whole team has double digits. So it's just that inconsistency is a lot. In college basketball, you can't have inconsistency. You need to be able to have guys who can score consistently and are passing the ball consistently. And when Penn State's not really getting a ton of ball movement, Ace Baldwin has the most assists on the team. He's averaging 4.5, and I think your top guy should probably have at least 6 or 7 assists a game at this level, because college basketball is a game where you need to find those openings. You need to find easy shots. You shouldn't be shooting deep 3-pointers all the time or tough fadeaway jumpers like the NBA is. So it's about finding what's easy and what's not easy. And if Penn State's already being inconsistent at this point and they're just playing easy basketball, I think there's a lot more struggles down there because ball movement's probably the most important thing. And you can't get ball movement, you can't put the ball through the hoop, you're not going to win games.
Yeah, I think this is a hard time in the season to turn it around if you're already showing, flashes of that. So that makes sense to me. I'm excited for Penn State to head to the Breslin. Game is 7 p.m., and I think it's streaming on Peacock, if I looked at that correctly, which is unfortunate. I hate games on Peacock. I said that last episode, but that's just a personal bias, I guess. I don't know. Um, Spartans Illustrated will be in the house in the Breslin covering the game, so give them a follow on Twitter for live game updates. I think that gives a really good picture of Penn State, Zane, so thank you so much for joining the pod. I'll be curious to see what Mike Rhodes does in the next couple years, as he builds his team with the guys that he wants, whether it be through the transfer portal or through recruiting, to see how Penn State does after he's had some time at the helm of the program. Thank you so much for watching our preview episode here. Subscribe to Spartans Illustrated for more football, basketball content. This episode will be on YouTube, so subscribe to our YouTube channel, and it will be wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Music, other options. Thanks so much for watching, and go green.